Hi whiskey enthusiasts. It's time to review some more whiskey, and today we'll be reviewing Clyde Mays Straight Bourbon Whiskey. Clyde Mays is largely known for their Alabama style whiskey, which is flavored with apples. I've not ever had that, but this is a sourced straight bourbon from Kentucky. It's largely believed to be made by Heaven Hill, although that's not actually verified. It comes in at 92 proof, and since it's straight bourbon whiskey and does not have an age statement, that means it has to be 4 years old at a minimum. So let's see what this tastes like. It's very fruit forward for a bourbon. There's a sort of a balance between sweet cherries and some vanilla. Light spices, but not very much. I don't get a huge amount of wood influence on this from the cask. There's a little bit of nutmeg and cinnamon in there. Not strong enough to be clove. There's just a hint of butterscotch. But that cherry note up front is very pronounced. The nose right off reminds me just a little bit of Blade and Bow, which is also very fruit forward. It's a nice nose if you like fruitier bourbons. It's, like I say, not very spicy. But there's nothing really to dislike about the nose in any way. All right, that was my first sip of whiskey today. So I'm going to let that settle into my tongue a little bit, and I'm not going to give any notes until the second sip. The palate is much less fruity and displays wood influence that wasn't there in the nose. You still get a really sweet arrival. There is still some of that cherry. You got a lot of vanilla. But almost from the beginning, there's a sawdust and slight char note in there. Late in the palate, there's a little bit of a black pepper note that arrives. There's a little bit of peachiness in the wood note. I know that sounds funny, but there's some fruitiness from the beginning of the palate that carries over towards the later palate when the wood makes itself known. And the combination of the fruit and the wood comes across to me as a little bit peachy. It's not pronounced, but it's there. The finish is a little bit unique in that there's a lot of wood putting itself forward. However, there's not a lot of spice. A lot of times what you get is a spiciness that comes out but this is more like a sawdust or a new oak kind of a note in the finish rather than a heavy spice. There's still a little bit of that nutmeg and light cinnamon in there. There's still the black pepper note. But overall, the finish doesn't take on that really spicy wood note. There is some dryness to the finish, sort of a leathery note to it. And there's something, I don't know, kind of tangy in the finish. I don't know how to explain that particular note right off. It almost seems to not belong with the rest of the flavors. So, in conclusion, I can't find anything really wrong with this bourbon at all. This is a solid, middle-of-the-road bourbon. I can't tell you that I dislike much of anything about it. There's not very much individual character to it either. It's a fairly generic offering of a 4-year-old bourbon. So that makes it a little bit difficult to grade in that it doesn't have anything really speaking for it, and it doesn't really have anything speaking against it. You can only say that it doesn't taste bad and it tastes like bourbon. If you like a super, super spicy bourbon, this isn't it. And honestly, the vanilla in it is kind of mediocre. It's not that present. There's a really strong sweetness, and especially on the nose, there's a lot of fruitiness. So the nose, I would actually grade higher than anything else. I would say the nose is probably about an 85. It's got a really pleasant nose. Unfortunately, the palate doesn't hold up to that, and the palate is more, for me, about a 78. And the finish, due to that odd note that doesn't really fit, is only about a 75. And remember, that's on our true 100-point scale, where an average whiskey of any type comes in at 50. So this is much better than some bottom shelf, low age whiskeys out there. It's a lot better than a lot of craft whiskeys that are out there that have very little age on them. It's pretty average among 4-year-old straight bourbon whiskey. As I said, you can't say anything bad about it. Try it, you might like it. As far as seeking it out, I really couldn't say that it would be good to seek out, because it doesn't offer you anything that every other bourbon doesn't offer you. And if I'm going to go looking for a bottle, I want something unique in it. So there you have it, Clyde Mays Straight Bourbon Whiskey. It's solid, nothing wrong with it. Drink it, but it's not unique. So if you're looking for something individual, fine. Not so much, unless you like the label. The label's really cool, but it's very, very average, decent bourbon. So that's what I have for you today. And whether you drink this or anything else, as always, go find you some whiskey you'll love.